Since we will run the roadshow event for the organizers and planners later on, but we have two more panels today to discuss, and I'm taking the floor for Chris Butler, who was a victim of the shutdowns in the US and could not fly over. I'll take the liberty to introduce you to our panelists here, Peter Kleppe, Martin Gundinger, and Sasha Radulovic, who are both Peter and Sasha, also longtime partners, not only of the Free Market Roadshow, but of the European Resource Bank meeting. Sasha is teaching and is the vice dean in Belgrade at the university, a longtime partner, and an economist, of course, and financial analyst, and also researching on that. And Peter is the editor of Brussels Report, a lawyer by training, and has been working with us, I don't know how many years, 20 years plus probably, and is a commentator on international media outlets. And our senior research fellow, Martin Gundinger, I don't have to introduce to you. Martin is an economist by training and has been part of our Institute and Austrian economics team for more than 15 plus years by now, I would say. I remember very well.
With a break, yes.
I remember very well when he came as a young student, or right after his first studies, and now he is one of our team members that we would not like to miss any longer. So, our topic today is public spending, Europe, quo vadis. And I've asked Sasha to give short introductory remarks, like 3 to 5 minutes max, and then we'll kick it off with Q&A right to the panelists, and of course with questions to you. The floor is yours. Sasha, feel free.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a true pleasure being here and having an opportunity to engage in a meaningful conversation with all of you. So, if we have a look at the long-run trends in terms of the size of government in Europe, like for the last 150 years, we can spot a tremendous increase from less than 10% of GDP, which was the size of government spending like end of 19th century. End of 19th century, to more than 45% of GDP nowadays, which is the actual spending in Europe. Basically, in the last 150 years, with the industrial revolutions, there was a need to invest in infrastructure, to invest in control of some sort of externalities, and in the second part of 20th century also we had the stronger voices for redistribution, which also pushed the government spending up. And from the theoretical point of view, we can explain that by means of a few arguments. With an increase in the level of development, the demand for public goods is rising, which is a Wagner's law. We can explain it by the growth of productivity in the private sector, which is pushing wages up, and there's a reflection of that wages in the public sector going up as well. And of course, we have political arguments, including the preferences of median voters. With an aging society in Europe, it's quite clear what the preferences, where the preferences are heading to. If, however, we have a look at the spending trends in the last 10 to 15 years, we come to pretty much similar conclusions, in the sense that government spending keeps rising in the last 2 decades as well. And the fact that we had like two pronounced global crises, like global financial crisis 2008 and COVID crisis early 2020s, actually accelerated that growth. And in economics there is a ratchet effect concept, which is saying once government spending goes up, it's quite difficult to take it back, to adjust it back to the pre-crisis level. And we have quite compelling data that this is actually happening in Europe in the last 2 decades. After the 2008 global economic crisis, government spending increased by 3% of GDP, which is like 8% in relative terms. While during the COVID crisis, it further increased by close to 2% of GDP. Actually, if we have a look at the data for 36 European countries, in 31 or 32 we have a significant increase of government spending in the last 15 years, which is quite striking result. Where are we now? So, according to the latest data, government spending in Europe is around 45% of GDP. So almost one half of the output is absorbed and redistributed by the government. In the past, we used to compare these data with the data for the United States, Australia, and so on, where the government spending was like around 30-35% of GDP. Now, it also makes sense to compare against China. Although China is a formerly communist country, overall government spending in China is 34% of GDP. So by 10% of GDP less than what we have in Europe. Of course, there is a significant variation across the countries. We have a few countries with relatively modest level of spending, around 30% of GDP. So the good example being Iceland for sure, we have Ireland, Switzerland, Malta, and so on. While on the other side of the spectrum, with government spending of more than 50% of GDP, so 50, not 15, more than 50% of GDP, we have France, Finland, Belgium, Austria as well, Italy, and so on. The fact that Europe is an aging society will probably make a further upward push on the government spending dynamics, as well as the geopolitical fragmentation will. We can hear strong voices for increase in defense spending. So if Europe was to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP, it means an increase by 3.5% of GDP. Where will that money come from? Well, either we will need to save from on other programs, such as environment protection, healthcare, education, infrastructure, and so on, or we will face higher taxes in the long run. So this reshuffle will may have pronounced effect on a further increase in government spending as well. In addition to that, the fact that the global turbulence is also associated with trade disruptions, which the world is facing in the last 12 months in particular, has had a negative impact on the economic activity in Europe in general, which harms tax revenues, and in some countries it will probably cause further hikes in tax rates in the future in order to be able to finance their government spending. So there are few channels which will probably make a further push on increase in government spending in Europe in the future as well. And the question is, what can be done about it? Are fiscal rules an answer? Well, there are compelling empirical evidences showing that in normal times, fiscal rules are effective in constraining the size of government, but we have seen that in the last 15 years we don't live in normal times. So every few years we have like an extraordinary event, which is a reason to call for exceptions, for an extraordinary clauses, which allow governments to further increase their spending. So I would say that these institutional arrangements are important, but they're probably no panacea, and they're not going to solve these issues. There are widespread theoretical discussions on the role of government in modern society. So from liberal view, which is to the minimal government, property rights, rule of law, infrastructure, to social democratic views with education, healthcare, green agenda, and so on. Nevertheless, it's quite obvious that quality of government policy does matter from broad perspective. Recently, we have completed one paper dealing with 26 former communist countries in Europe and Central Asia to evaluate, to answer simple question, why some countries grow faster than the other countries. And our results actually show that the quality of government policy explains like more than a half of variation. And the question is, what are good policies? Basically, the results indicate that lower tax burden, lower deficit, lower debt is on average in the long run friendly for growth. So instead of focusing on what to spend taxpayers' money in the future on, I think that the answer is on bolstering efficiency and encouraging free entrepreneurship. I will stop here and I will be happy to continue the discussion on the questions that will follow. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sasha, for these insights and introductory remarks. I just returned from the Parliamentarian Fiscal Pact Conference in Billund, Denmark, because it was held there because of the presidency. And the majority of speakers, we were discussing the parliamentary framework, budgetary framework for EU 28 to 34. Although the majority was still believing we can raise our debt levels, we can increase that, and only a minority of parliamentarians were speaking against those measures. So my question goes to Martin now right away. The illusion of debt breaks, and we have seen that from Germany. When Merz came to power, he probably forgot about that break. What can we do about the constitutional debt breaks? We see the example of Switzerland. What are your general thoughts on that? And give us the example of Austria that turned from a poster child within the frugal five in Europe within 4 years to the country that is ranking the worst.
Well, as Sasha was already saying, of course, debt breaks work in normal circumstances. Unfortunately, now I would make the argument, even since 2000, after the dot-com bubble, we are not living in normal times anymore. It's just governments are taking every excuse and even creating excuses to boost their spending, to by that also increase the debt. So I'm not completely sure how we make a debt break really functional anymore, because to even get a debt break through Parliament, I think it's important to have these kind of emergency clauses, because without that, there's no chance you will get that through democratically, in my opinion. There's just too much democratic push against it. Also, what you were already mentioning, the societies are getting older and older, and because of that, spending will probably increase simply because of that. So, am I in favor of a debt break? Yes, of course I am. But am I optimistic that a debt break that I could think of will be really enforceable? I don't think so. I can't think of a concept of a debt break that could be both politically realistic and also functioning in a way. So I'm sorry I can't tell you anything more optimistic on that, but I'm sorry.
Well then, thank you very much, Martin, for those negative outcomes. And again, I think we are here all together, and this was also another suggestion by Michael. We should kind of create a resolution. After all, it's a whole bunch of intellectuals, think tanks, leaders of groups that are in favor of enterprises, of free market economics, and journalists. So why don't we try to sit down and have a resolution, send it back to Brussels, and we can only push and push and push in order to promote our ideas. And since Peter is most of the time, if he's not traveling and giving talks, around the world is in Brussels, is based in Brussels. I would simply ask you, and you have followed that, tax competition versus EU cartelization. What are your thoughts? What can we do, as not only as individuals, but as freedom fighters, I would say, and fighters for low taxes, in order to get out of this trap?
Well, I strongly believe in engaging in the debates and trying to win the argument. So, I mean, very short answer. I'm personally a skeptic of big protests and all kinds of non-intellectual means of engagement. Yeah, so I don't have much more to say about that. When it comes to the topic you were mentioning, Brussels, the European Union, fighting tax competition, we have a big challenge at our hands. So the President of the United States, Donald Trump, took the US out of the OECD minimum tax rate arrangement, corporate tax rate arrangement in June, I think. The European Union is continuing with this. They want to have these minimum corporate taxation, which of course is undermining tax competition. Simultaneously, Brussels is also trying to acquire more and more direct taxation powers. Technically, they call this own resources for the long-term EU budget. They already have something from like some kind of a plastic tax, but they want to expand this to a number of things. They want a part of the corporate tax income for the Brussels budget. This is fiercely resisted by member states. They want a tax on tobacco. Thankfully, this is also fiercely resisted. But they will continue to push. There used to be a proposal, the CCCTB, which is the Common Consolidated Corporate Tax Base, and the European Commission proposed this in 2011. And the idea was, look, we don't want to dictate the corporate tax rates, but we want to dictate the conditions under which member states identify the tax base for companies. So this is sort of an indirect way to affect corporate taxation. From the very beginning, there was a lot of opposition among member states, but this, of course, did not stop the Commission from continuing to push for it. They only repealed it 12 years later, in 2023, and they replaced it with a proposal for a framework for income taxation, just to give you an idea how, how persistent the bureaucrats are. In the summer, Ursula von der Leyen and her friends, they came up with a massive push for a much bigger EU budget, and there was very little support for this. There was just a diplomat quoted in a Brussels medium, in Euractiv, who said that specifically for the core proposal, it's called CORE, which is this new push for the European Commission to get their hands on part of the corporate tax revenue for member states. There is not a single member state in favor, not a single one. And still, Ursula von der Leyen and her institution come up with this proposal. So I think, apart from whether this is a good or a bad proposal, this really should raise some questions about this particular bureaucracy and how completely out of touch it is. Maybe one more thing, when it comes to the effect of the Brussels taxation influence on the European economy. So I'm sure you've all been following the news that Germany is in a terrible economic situation. Companies that are more than 100 years old are going bust. And we all know the reason. The reason is that the price of energy is so high, and it's completely impossible for our European industry or German industry to compete with this. Now, what is the reason that the energy price is so high? Yes, Russia cut off the gas, sure. Yes, Germany shut down its nuclear plants, but it's more than that. We import shale gas from the United States in Europe. Shale gas is very, very bad for the environment, or regulators claim, but we're not above buying it at an extremely high price from the US. At the same time, it's possible, according to many experts, in Poland, in Germany, potentially to also have shale gas. Now, this is of course all long-term. To restart nuclear plants is very complicated. It's possible, and I hope we're getting there. Thankfully, public opinion is strongly in favor of nuclear power now, which is good. Maybe apart from some countries, I think Austria is one. But across the world, and certainly in Europe, we see a very welcome change of heart here, a lot more rationality, I would say. But there's one measure that the European Union and its member states could take today to restore competitiveness for industry, and yet nobody's talking about it. So if you look at the American natural gas price, which is of course very important for industry, more than the electricity price even, this is in the United States, no, in Europe, it's 4 to 5 times as high as in the United States, thanks to the shale gas revolution, right? You would think, not only because of the shale gas revolution, because if this is the European natural gas price, and 1/5 is the American natural gas price, the part of our natural gas price that consists of the climate taxation of the European Union is twice as big as the total American natural gas price. So with the stroke of a pen, if European governments would decide to abolish the emission trading system, which is a cap and trade system from the EU, it's not like a direct tax, it's some kind of an obligation for industry to, you know, buy emission rights, but effectively it's a climate tax. If they would abolish this, then at least the European industry would be relieved. Maybe one more quote, maybe you know INEOS, it's one of the biggest chemical concerns in Europe. So on their website they warned this year that the European chemical sector is on the brink of extinction. It's going to disappear. I mean, that's not a light statement. That's what they're literally saying. You would think that there's a lot more alarmism about this because the chemical sector is the backbone of industry, and you would think that my proposal to abolish the ETS, that this would be at least something that some politicians would be supporting, but I don't think you hear anything about this. There's complete lethargy. So yes, I think if you're to answer your question, Barbara, we first have to try to, you know, start this debate and instigate people to realize that there are solutions. But yeah, we have to be willing to violate some taboos, some climate taboos. But if you look at the CO2 emissions in the US since 2005, in percentage terms, they have dropped more than in Europe, despite the fact that they do not have, for the most part, cap and trade emission trading system. So there's other ways to reduce CO2 emission, and they did it by replacing coal and have shale gas instead. So yes, very important to inform the debate, I would say.
Thank you very much. You touched upon, Peter, and actually Sasha, you also touched upon the green transition and the issue of the problems that this has created so far. I would like to touch upon another topic before I open it to the floor for questions and discussions and debate. CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. The new solution for all our problems. At least in light of the European Commission and the European Central Bank. Is there anything good about CBDCs, or, and I turn this question to all three of you, is there anything good of it? Should we use those? Should we welcome CBDCs? Should we rather look at our private payment solutions that are already out there? Is the ECB creating something that we don't need at all? Creating a solution for a problem that doesn't exist yet? or will they use the CBDCs as a means to solve some of those debt problems? What are your thoughts on that, and would there be alternatives, and what needs to be done in order to fix our debt levels?
Should I start? Okay.
Whoever.
Well, for CBDCs, I think they are incredibly dangerous, but I have to, I have to kind of, make some arguments before that. I think there's great confusion regarding CBDCs, what they are, and that they are essentially the same thing as cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin even. There's nothing that could be further from the truth. Bitcoins are a decentralized, or is a decentralized currency, the same as for pretty much all the cryptocurrencies. And they are encrypted, that's why they are called cryptocurrencies. So there's no way for a central authority to change the currency, to implement some measures, for example, that the currency is only valid until 2027 or something like this. This is all not possible with cryptocurrencies, or at least with most cryptocurrencies. With Bitcoin especially, it is not. For CBDCs, this is possible. You can say, okay, the currency is only valid until 2027, and if you didn't spend it up to then the currency is gone. Or they can say something like, okay, we have an emergency right now, 5% of all the assets belong now to the state. That's possible with CBDCs. So that's why...
Sorry, that was even possible. Remember Cyprus?
Exactly, Cyprus. But it's easier even with CBDCs because it's just a click on a computer button, not more. So this is why, in my opinion, it's very, very dangerous what's happening now with the CBDCs. You also asked whether this could be used to decrease debt, government debt. Yes, it can be used for that, but that's where the danger actually is. Because this is a burden for all of you who have assets. That's where the money comes from, where the governments will try to consolidate the debt. So again, very, very dangerous what's happening here, but again, please don't confuse CBDCs with cryptocurrencies. Completely different products, completely different. And my argument would be the solution we would have to push are exactly the cryptocurrencies, because all the dangers that CBDCs have are not present for cryptocurrencies, and there especially Bitcoin, and maybe for some transactions even Monero, because as some of you have maybe already heard, Bitcoin is not anonymous, Monero is. So if you want to stay anonymous, go for Monero. That's all.
Question of freedom and anonymity. Sasha, your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Withstanding the arguments Martin raised with respect to the risks associated with digital assets, I would get back to Barbara's question the way you put it. So, are there any potential advantages of it? So, in overall terms, shift from cash-based payments to digital payments is associated with many risks and many question marks. But on the other hand, there is one clear benefit, let's say for the government, but I would say for the society as well. So having digital payments enhances traceability of transactions, with many risks aside. It narrows the scope for informal economy, which is reflected onto more money in government budgets, higher tax revenues. That can be seen as an opportunity maybe to cut the tax rates. So if that transition is associated with strong push for the society, not to use, as Friedman said, when you have more tax money, you will increase your spending, or the other way, or vice versa. So if additional tax revenue flows that would be generated through transition to digital payments would be used to cut some tax rates, that could be beneficial. So in that case, we would have a broader tax base, taxed away with the lower tax rates. However, I can't see why the existing private digital payment solutions could not be used to achieve that. So I can't spot an advantage of the CBDCs versus the private digital payment solutions in that sense, in the sense of these potential benefits. So I think it's definitely be a hot topic in the years to come, and providing the argumented discussion like this one is an important contribution to the future of that project.
Peter, the white paper that came out June 28th, 2023, from the Commission, one on cash and the other on CBDCs, is now in circulation for more than 2 years. The ECB has announced that they will start with tests on the digital euro as of this fall. We have heard the costs for this are, at least for the banks, 30 billion across Europe, not to look into the technological updates of machines and card readers, etc. So there's a lot of things at stake. The other thing is the private sector, the fintech sector actually has been very quiet so far. And since you are in the heart of the beast in Brussels, what do you hear from lobbyists, banks, finance industry with regards to the push from the Commission and the ECB towards CBDCs? Is there anything out there?
Yeah, I think it's surprisingly quiet from the front of the private banks. That's sort of what has not been getting so much attention when you're talking about this topic. Everybody's always warning about, the increased control and the potential abuses that we may see with these kind of, government digital currencies. But it would of course increase the role of the state in our monetary system. At the moment, thankfully, we still have private banks that are completely colonized by the state. I think half of their staff is doing compliance or something. But still, they still have some kind of, they add a private element into it. When the central bank tries to flood the system with money, these institutions will still, because they will be liable if things go wrong, not just start lending like crazy people. So I think that's also one of the risks with CBDCs, that when the government tries to take over the remaining parts of the monetary system by in this way, that the last sort of vestige of sanity is gone. It's very worrying. Christine Lagarde, she said, we want this because we don't want to lose control. And of course, this was not very smart from her communication-wise, because everybody was simply quoting her. But what I think was, and the criticism that that this was all about the ECB trying to control society and the government was of course justified. But what she meant, I think, was that it would be dangerous if, for example, China would launch sort of a TikTok equivalent of money that becomes super popular in the West, and at some point everybody would start paying each other with some China CCP controlled currency, and the Western governments would no longer be able to control that. I think that's sort of the excuse that they come up with to justify CBDCs.
Let me interrupt you for a second. The Chinese have the digital renminbi for more than 5 years in practice in more than 8 provinces, and it's much more technically advanced than anything that we in Europe can think of. when we were there at the Chinese Central Bank, they told us, next time you come, you can use your cell phone and upload the digital renminbi and can pay with the Chinese digital currency. Thanks, but no thanks. I mean, saying that, but even you tourists can use it. And so this, what you mentioned,
Yes.
would be the next step.
And that would be I think that's the stated fear, at least at that point 2 years ago when Lagarde said that. But now it seems to have changed a little bit. I don't know if you saw it, but a few weeks ago, some central bank bureaucrat in Russia, he was claiming that it's not China, but it's the United States that wants to sort of impose its own CBDC on the whole world, and then once they've done so, they will of course then use it to erode the purchasing power of money to finance US government spending. So anyway, I mean, are these legitimate concerns from our central bank establishments? Maybe, but then if that would be such a big risk, I could imagine that they could simply ban Chinese state money in Europe or American state money usage in Europe. I would think, right? For me, it's not a reason to introduce European digital state money.
Martin, and then
yeah.
I'll open to the floor.
I just want to add two more things. First one, just because it wasn't mentioned, if we have a CBDC, of course, the risk of a social credit system like they already have in China is much, much greater. So that's a risk to keep in mind there. And then I want to maybe give an optimistic outlook in a weird way. Maybe if there's something you can count on for many politicians, that's corruption. And this is the reason why I think there will be channels to avoid the CBDC, simply because some politicians have an incentive to keep these channels open. That's why I think that at least some crypto or some other currency will still be available even if we have CBDCs. I hope that's optimistic enough for you.
Well, thank you.